No, the Law Society of Ontario is the largest law society in this country. And a few years ago, there was a statement of principles that was put forward to be adopted by every lawyer in that province, which would reaffirm and recognize a commitment to ensuring diversity and equity within the profession. I think it was a long overdue process. But what you had immediately was a backlash that started to say that we want to speak out on, this is a restriction of our freedom of speech. And so while that was the initial kind of pushback was this is a violation of free speech, and you've dealt with this, right? Which is these free speech advocates who are hiding or disguising their own bigotry by leveraging that. So they actually then organize themselves, these free speech advocates organize themselves into a slate to stop the statement of principles. And they get elected and they take over the benches of the Law Society of Ontario. Very underreported story within Canada. And so they move forward with the dismantling of the statement of principles, but it doesn't stop there. Then they move on to what was the Equity and Diversity Committee of the Law Society, which had been doing consultations with groups that were, stakeholders, and they basically bring forward a motion to stop third parties and stakeholders from engaging in this process. So now it's gone beyond just our freedom of speech, but now this is going to now prevent others from being able to speak to issues of race and equity and diversity. And I was so disturbed by the comments of one of the benchers. I saw it a few days ago. So one of the benchers, again, this prestigious position that exists within the legal profession, where he starts to speak about equity and equality and diversity as elitism, as that this is kind of reverse racism and all of those things. And I was just struck that we're now in a position where people who have become so privileged that for them equality feels like oppression.
Yeah, absolutely, because they've enjoyed it for way too long.
And so here, as young lawyers of diverse backgrounds who are trying to put our position, to carve out a space for ourselves, this is what we're facing in this country, right? We're now being told that our desire to speak out about the systemic racism that exists in this profession, that the issues that you have with the lack of diversity in the judiciary and the lack of lived experience for them to speak to is an issue that is us being elitist. To me, that speaks to a national crisis. That is a real national crisis because, how will, and again, you can appreciate how intimidating a judicial proceeding is for many people. And for them to stand there and now be judged for, their cultural background or not be able to, there was a prominent case that happened in Alberta where a judge discounted the experience of a expert witness because of his problems with the English language being his second language. So there was findings to undermine his credibility, not based on his expertise, not based on the substance of what he was saying, but the way he said it.
Yeah.
That is absolutely unacceptable in 2020. Where is the outrage?
Yeah.
Where are the people who speak to the rule of law coming out and standing with us as allies? Where are they to speak to those issues? But the rule of law only applies in situations that are convenient for them. And you look at the issue with the blockades, go back to that issue. And
not to mention that almost every atrocity that's happened in human history has been legal at the time.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And part of this, this is the discussion I wanted to get into, which is, for the Sikh community, when we see the problems with the Indian Act, you hear about the legacy, the discrimination that exists within the Indian Act. We have our own parallels that exist because of colonialism, right? So in India, prior to partition, prior to independence, during the British Raj, the British Raj wanted to control similar ways the Sikh community. And so they passed what's called the SGPC Act of 1912, which is the Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee Act, which is to say, this is how Sikhs will now govern themselves and their institutions of faith. And it's, similar, you have an election and you democratically elect certain individuals, and those people will now become your spokespeople, and now we will only negotiate with them and speak to them. Very similar parallels with the Indian Act. There's a huge, significant portion of people who say we're not going to engage in that process because that's not part of our own governance cycles and our own governance structures, and that we have our sovereignty. We are sovereigns amongst ourselves, and we can do things how we wanted to do it, and we've always done it prior to your intervention. And within the Sikh community in India, our governance structure, the way we make decisions is not 50+1. It's not through voting, it's through what's called Sarvasamti, which is unanimous decision-making. So Sarvasamti is this unanimous decision-making process where you have to continue to negotiate an issue until you all agree. There's no space for a majority to try to oppress a smaller group. Yeah. You have to all agree. And if you cannot all agree, there is no decision.
Yeah. And the beauty of that is that you don't have, people who are begrudgingly accepting the decision even though they're on the losing side.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, this is just diplomacy 101, right?
And what you have, and so again, here you have in the indigenous communities, and so Wet'suwet'en say that we've got this alternative structure, which is the hereditary chief structure that they defer to rather than to what is the problematic Indian Act. For Canadians, and majority of Canadians, they say, well, it's democracy, you've chosen, this is your elected officials. Again, you're not listening to the issue. You're not listening to what these people are telling you, right? And you're not trying to understand the legacies of colonialism, the legacies of the Canadian government stripping them of their own sovereignty. So if we take the time to actually, and part of this is the failure of successive British Columbian governments, Canadian governments, that have not sat down with the Indigenous and reconciled the issue of these unceded territories, right? The Supreme Court of this country recognizes Indigenous title, recognizes that, these people have certain governance structures, but we continue to defer back to the Indian Act in a very kind of patronizing way and say, well, you elected people. But for us as minorities, we can find these parallels, right? And we still struggle with this today. We've seen the abuse of the system within the Sikh community.